It was nearly 10:30 in the morning when Miss Harriet Hume, a live-in secretary at the Witherington Institute for Applied Psychology, let out a scream that tore through the library corridor like the sharp crack of a rifle. The stillness of the old Edwardian mansion, repurposed for research into the mind's deeper workings, was shattered. Dr. Ambrose Witherington, founder and head of the Institute, had been discovered dead in what staff affectionately and ironically referred to as the Quietest Room in England. The Quietest Room was more than a nickname. Technically, it was the anechoic chamber, constructed to allow total sensory isolation for certain cognitive experiments. Its walls, floor, and ceiling were lined with wedge-shaped foam designed to absorb all sound. No echo, no resonance, no trace of human presence. Not even footsteps rang inside. Subjects who spent more than 15 minutes in it often emerged, pale and rattled. Dr. Witherington had often said that prolonged silence was a better test of one's sanity than 1,000 inkblot cards, but now, there he lay spread awkwardly in the center of the chamber, eyes wide and glassy, a small pool of blood gathering beneath his left ear. There were no signs of a struggle, no sign of forced entry. No one had heard a thing. Not that they would have. The door to the chamber was heavy, industrial, and sealed airtight when closed. Chief Inspector Frobisher of the Oxfordshire Constabulary arrived within the hour, glancing up at the high, ivy-covered foyer of the Institute. With distaste, he'd never liked these academic types, always too clever by half. But this, a man murdered inside a room designed to make sound impossible. He rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. The staff were already gathered in the lounge. Miss Hume, pale and trembling, Mr. Harold Vexley, the assistant technician, Professor Eloise Brand, a researcher in behavioral linguistics, and Dr. Simon Clee, the Institute's deputy director. It was locked from the inside. Frobisher asked, eyeing them, and turned out. Miss Hume nodded quickly. Dr. Witherington always locked it from within. He said it was essential to maintain the chamber's acoustic purity. No one could open it unless he unsealed it himself. There's no handle on the outside, and no one else had a key. Only Dr. Clee has access. But he was in the lecture hall all morning. Miss Hume added. Dr. Clee confirmed this. Several students had seen him giving his usual Tuesday seminar. His alibi appeared watertight. Cause of death? Frobisher asked the young pathologist who had just arrived. The man crouched over the body, examining the small but lethal wound behind the left ear. Single puncture. Something long and narrow, possibly a stiletto blade or even a sharpened instrument. Of medical design, no bruising or signs of restraint. He probably didn't even see it coming. No weapon found in the room. None, the pathologist said grimly. Frobisher straightened. So, a man gets into a sealed room, kills Dr. Witherington in silence, removes the weapon, and leaves without leaving any trace or being heard, in a place where sound itself doesn't exist. Wonderful. The scene made headlines by midday. Murder in the Quietest Room. It was sensational, bizarre enough to attract the attention of Lord Peter Wimsey, who happened to be visiting a cousin at nearby Witham Abbey. The name Witherington was familiar to him. The doctor had once spoken at a symposium on auditory hallucinations, which Lord Peter had found deliciously unsettling. The oddity of the case now pulled at him like an unfinished melody. Lord Peter arrived unannounced, breezing into the Witherington Institute with an apology and a smile that only the aristocracy could carry without insult. He gained access to the crime scene with a few well-placed remarks about his previous success in unspeakably delicate matters, and Frobisher reluctantly allowed it. Inside the chamber, Wimsey stood in silence, tilting his head slightly. The room felt like a vacuum. Even the sound of his own breath failed to register. He closed his eyes. Marvelous, he murmured to himself, a murder committed in utter silence. Quite the philosophical conundrum. He bent low to study the blood. Dried now, almost black. The position of the body was strange, neither collapsed nor rigid, as though Witherington had been standing perfectly still when struck, and fell like a felled statue. Returning to the lounge, Wimsey faced the assembled staff. A question, if you please. Why was Dr. Witherington using the chamber today, Harold? Vexley stepped forward. He said he wanted to test a new theory that silence could induce synthetic hallucinations under certain stress conditions. He entered the chamber just after 8. Miss Hume was to call him out by intercom at 10. But when she got no response, she opened the chamber manually and found him. Manual override. Yes, Vexley nodded. There's an emergency. Lever hidden behind the wall panel. Only staff know about it. Whimsy's brow lifted. Ah, so the room was not as sealed as first believed. Miss Hume looked indignant. But no one would use that lever unless it was an emergency. Lord Peter smiled benignly. Indeed. But murder tends to qualify. He turned to Dr. Clee. You gave a lecture this morning. Yes, from 8:30 to 10:30. Room for B. Dozens of students were present, and the time of death, estimated between 8:30 and 9. Frobisher offered. Whimsy began to pace. So the killer accessed a sealed room that was not quite sealed. Entered between 8 and 8:30. Struck silently, left, resealed the door. No sound. No witnesses, no weapon. One could almost believe the room committed the act itself. He paused at the chamber door, staring at it. Unless, he added softly, it wasn't murder as we conventionally know it. Back in the technician's room, he asked Vexley for a tour of the control system. The young man obliged, showing him a tangle of dials, meters, and acoustic calibrators. This controls the external intercom? Whimsy asked. Yes, sir. Is it possible to play recorded sound into the chamber? Not usually. But we have a test signal we sometimes broadcast, a sort of humming tone to check the dampening rate. Would Dr. Witherington have had access to that? Of course. He used it all the time during tests. Whimsy said nothing for a long moment. Then he turned on his heel and asked to see the late doctor's personal office. The door was locked, but Miss Hume opened it with shaking fingers. On the desk lay a notebook, half open. Whimsy scanned the final entries. The last line read, if exposed long enough, even artificial silence becomes distorted. The mind begins to scream into its own void. He frowned. The line was both poetic and ominous. Miss Hume, he asked, had Dr. Witherington been unwell lately? She hesitated. He was under strain. His latest papers were rejected by the Royal Society. He mentioned being haunted by the silence he created. He said it was louder than sound. Whimsy shut the book gently. And you found no weapon, only a man lying peacefully in a place designed to erase every sound of life. He looked up, eyes suddenly sharp. Get me a list of every object removed from the chamber after the body was discovered. Vexley went pale. Nothing was removed. Nothing except the body. Whimsy nodded. Which is why we have an unsolvable crime, because the answer was removed within the body itself. He stepped closer to Frobisher. You'll want the pathologist to check behind the victim's left molars. If I'm not mistaken, he'll find a tiny, splintered fragment of sharpened bone, his own, broken and driven inward by pressure. Dr. Witherington didn't die by someone else's hand. He died from an internal hemorrhage caused by a stress-induced seizure. The silence didn't just kill him. He used it to kill himself. The room fell silent. But why? Whispered Miss Hume. Lord Peter. Whimsy turned back to the quietest room and stared at the door as though it breathed. Because sometimes the loudest scream is the one we keep locked in silence. Lord Peter. Whimsy lingered in the quietest room, longer than anyone expected. Even after the body had been removed, the forensic team dismissed, and the institutional hush returned to the halls, he remained inside, seated cross-legged on the padded floor, eyes closed, his breath shallow. To the casual observer, he might have appeared to meditate. But Lord Peter had never believed in stillness for its own sake. He was listening not with his ears, but with his instinct, tracing the contours of a scene too silent for ordinary comprehension. After 15 minutes, he stood abruptly, opened the heavy door, and stepped into the corridor, blinking against the filtered light. Chief Inspector Frobisher was waiting, arms folded, clearly unimpressed. Find anything in there, my lord? Nothing audible, Whimsy replied, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeves, but enough to provoke a thought. You'll indulge me, I hope, if I have a closer look at Dr. Witherington's office. Frobisher sighed. It's already been combed. No sign of forced entry, missing items. or anything to suggest foul play beyond the man being mysteriously dead. Yes, said Whimsy lightly, except that death, in this case, was not so mysterious after all, merely poorly timed. The body spoke volumes. But I'd wager the office might whisper a few counter-arguments if we listened correctly. They entered again, the air stale with the scent of leather, ink, and the faint chemical tang of brain tonic tablets. Whimsy's eyes moved across the shelves, the desk, the stack of correspondence laid out in rigid alignment to rigid, he thought. He stopped before a wastepaper basket. It was empty. Miss Hume, he called, and the secretary, lingering just outside, poked her head in. Sir? Who usually empties this bin? I do, she said, every evening. But yesterday Dr. Witherington told me not to disturb anything in his office after 6. He said he was compiling references for a final manuscript. Whimsy arched an eyebrow. Final, you say? Did he use those exact words? Yes, sir. Morbid, don't you think? He turned back to the desk, opened a drawer, and began leafing through the files. Frobisher cleared his throat. Is that strictly necessary? It's vital, Whimsy said, extracting a thick envelope from the back. He removed the contents, reams of printed pages. The top marked an exploration of cognitive silence in isolated environments, and flicked through them with delicate precision. Several pages in, he paused, curious. What is? Asked Frobisher, stepping closer. This paragraph is typewritten on a different machine. He held the sheet toward the light. See here, the lowercase e is faint, the s slightly raised. But on these earlier pages, the alignment is cleaner. Not the same typewriter at all. Frobisher grunted. Could be a last-minute edit. Could be, Whimsy agreed. But why change machines mid-document? Unless the addition came from someone else. He replaced the envelope, then moved to the bookshelf, eyes scanning spines until he plucked down a slim red volume, Young and the Unconscious Mind. He flipped it open, then grinned faintly. A pressed flower-white alyssum fell out. Sentimental, he murmured. Frobisher scowled. Do we need to look through his flower collection now? Possibly not, said Whimsy, still holding the fragile stem. But you know, white alyssum often symbolizes truth, or absence thereof. Depends on the sender. He tucked it back and turned toward the corridor. I'd like a word with Miss Hume. Alone. If you please. They found her in the staff lounge, clutching a teacup like a lifeline. Tell me, Miss Hume, Whimsy said gently. Were you and Dr. Witherington close? She blinked, startled. No. I mean, we worked together for years. He respected me, I think. But no, there was nothing personal. No one would suggest impropriety, he said, smiling. But sometimes respect is the more dangerous attachment. Her lips parted to respond, but he pressed on. Did he often make sudden changes to his manuscripts? She hesitated. Not often, but he had been distracted lately. He mentioned someone trying to interfere with his work. Did he name them? No, but he said someone was distorting his ideas, misrepresenting them. Did he mention what was in the final chapter he wrote last night? She frowned, only that it would clarify everything. But I never read it. He said it would speak for itself. Whimsy gave a thoughtful nod, then changed tack. When you entered the quietest room, where exactly was the body positioned? In the center, face up, eyes open, arms by his sides, shoes still on. Whimsy's gaze sharpened. Still on? Are subjects normally allowed shoes in the chamber? No, sir. We always make them remove footwear. Even soft soles can create vibration. Yet no one removed Dr. Witherington's shoes. No. I assumed he made an exception. He nodded slowly, thanked her, and returned once more to the chamber. He crouched at the very center, where the pool of blood had been, and studied the floor. The foam wedges here were depressed and dented, not just from the body, but a second set nearby, slightly askew. A heel mark. He turned to Vexley, who was hovering by the door. Mr. Vexley, who calibrated the chamber last? I did, the technician said. Sunday afternoon. And who used it between then and the time of death? Just Dr. Witherington. No students, none. Sir, he reserved it all week. Whimsy stood. Would you say anyone else could have entered unnoticed? I suppose if they had the emergency override and came early. Whimsy's eyes glittered. Yes, that would require the killer to risk being caught unless they were confident no one would see them. Back in the hallway, he pulled Frobisher aside. "Inspector, we must reconsider Dr. Clee's alibi. If he entered before 8:30 and used the override, he could have killed Witherington before the seminar. He was seen arriving at 8:25, but no one saw him between 7:45 and then. No. Then we have our gap." Frobisher's jaw set. "You think Clee's the killer? I think he's involved," Whimsy said, but he didn't. "Act alone. There's too much deception in the details. The shoes, the paragraph from another typewriter, the flower pressed into a book he hadn't opened in years. Someone wanted to shape the narrative of Witherington's death, and that suggests motive beyond madness or suicide." He glanced once more at the corridor, at the sealed chamber now silent again. "I think the truth is still in that room. Not in the air, but in what was carried in and never listed on any evidence sheet. Something absurd. Something overlooked." Frobisher frowned. "Like what?" Whimsy's voice dropped to a whisper. "Like a shoehorn." Lord Peter Whimsy stood in the corridor a moment longer, the corners of his mouth twitching in quiet amusement. "A shoehorn, yes. An object so mundane, so domesticated, it would never be catalogued as suspicious. Yet in a room where sound had no purchase and the smallest detail mattered, it might prove pivotal." He tucked the idea away, like a queen behind a row of pawns, and turned on his heel. Frobisher had already summoned the main staff to the reading room for formal interviews. The furniture had been rearranged into something like a courtroom, a large oak table, facing a row of chairs. It was a far cry from a police station. But Lord Peter knew the truth rarely required bars to reveal itself, only pressure and time. He began with Dr. Simon Clee. The deputy director entered with his usual calm, his spectacles glinting. He adjusted his cuffs before sitting, as if settling for a portrait. "Dr. Clee," Whimsy began casually, "you were the last person to see Dr. Witherington alive, were you not?" Clee paused. "Perhaps. I spoke with him briefly at breakfast 7:30 or so. We discussed the upcoming publication deadline for our journal." "Was he agitated?" Clee gave a mild shrug. "No more than usual. Ambrose could be intense, especially when grappling with new ideas." "Did he mention anything about the Quietest Room?" "He said he intended to run a final personal trial. He believed the silence could evoke hallucinatory voices. He wanted to push it further, see if the mind would invent its own language." In the absence of external sound, Whimsy leaned forward, fingers steepled. "And you had no concerns about his mental state?" Clee hesitated for the first time. He was tired, isolated, but no more than anyone else in this line of research. Whimsy smiled faintly. "And where were you between 8 and 8:30? "In my office, preparing for the lecture. Alone, yes, but I left for room for B at 8:25. Plenty of students saw me arrive. A short walk, I imagine, 3 minutes, perhaps. Long enough to detour briefly." Clee's expression stiffened. "I don't follow. Let me put it this way," Whimsy said smoothly. "You've known Dr. Witherington for 17 years, worked with him through 3 revisions of the Institute's charter, co-authored 6 papers, and yet when I asked about sentiment you referred to him only as intense. No warmth, no affection." Clee gave a tight smile. "I'm a scientist, Lord Whimsy. I don't romanticize my colleagues, no, but perhaps you resent them, especially those who eclipse your work." Clee stood abruptly. "If you're accusing me of something, I'm not," said Whimsy mildly. "I'm simply noting that ambition makes strange bedfellows. Do sit down." Clee did, slowly, his hands now clasped tightly. Whimsy made a note and gestured to the next person. Miss Harriet Hume stepped forward nervously, her eyes flicking from Whimsy to Frobisher and back. "Miss Hume," Whimsy began gently, "you said earlier that Dr. Witherington instructed you not to disturb his office after 6 the night before his death. Do you know why?" "He said he needed to focus, that he was refining a theory." "Did he often ask for privacy? Only when writing?" "He was meticulous." Whimsy leaned back. "And yet you mentioned earlier he believed someone was trying to distort his work." "Yes," she said slowly. "He seemed worried. He thought someone was leaking ideas." "To whom?" He never said, did you? She blinked. Me, you. Were privy to his notes. You typed for him. You managed his calendar. I would never know. Whimsy said quickly. You wouldn't, unless you believed it would help him. Suppose someone offered to amplify his ideas, gain recognition. Perhaps you thought it harmless. She looked down. I typed an extract, once, just 1 page. Dr. Klee asked. For a draft, he said it was urgent. When was this? 2 weeks ago. Which page? I don't know. I only had the page. Klee gave it back the next day. Said he didn't need it after all. Whimsy's smile didn't change, but something behind his eyes sharpened. Thank you, he said softly. That's all for now. Next came Harold. Vexley, shoulders hunched, fingers twitching nervously as he sat. You calibrated the quietest room last? Whimsy asked. Yes, sir. Sunday evening. And on the morning of the death. Where were you? In the tech wing. Testing headset. Volumes for the EG lab. Alone? No, I was with Dr. Brand. She was fitting a subject with the neuromap rig. Would she confirm that? I think so. Yes, Whimsy nodded. What's your opinion of Dr. Witherington? Vexley shrugged. Brilliant, but weird. In what way? He talked to the machines, not jokingly. Proper conversations. Said he could hear the walls talk back. Whimsy's brow lifted. And you didn't report this. To whom? Everyone hears strange. Fair point, Whimsy muttered. Vexley hesitated. I did notice something odd, though. Yes? The sound meter in the quietest room, it was showing vibration, tiny pulses. But no one was inside. It happened around 7:50. You're certain? I logged it. It shouldn't be possible. But the walls registered frequency pressure. Just for 30 seconds. Then nothing. Whimsy's pen paused. Did you tell anyone? No. Thank you, Mr. Vexley. That's very helpful. Finally, Dr. Eloise Brand entered. Tall, composed. Her hair pulled tightly back. She looked more likely to interrogate than be questioned. You were with Mr. Vexley during the critical period? Yes. From 8 until 9. EG prep. I signed the logbook. And you heard nothing suspicious? Of course not. That room is soundproofed 6 times over. Whimsy regarded her carefully. Do you believe Dr. Witherington's death was suicide? She smiled coolly. He was a genius, but isolated, and isolation breeds delusion. Do you think he imagined threats where there were none? Don't we all? But not everyone ends up dead in a sealed room. Dr. Brand, she said nothing. Did you like him? I respected him. He pushed boundaries, though I sometimes questioned his methods. In what way? She shifted. He was always looking for the dramatic conclusion, the grand proof. But science doesn't work that way. It's slow, incremental. Perhaps he feared being overtaken? Perhaps. Whimsy let silence stretch between them, just long enough. To press, did you ever help him with his writing? No. I read his drafts once years ago. He didn't like criticism, and yet someone helped him insert an altered paragraph. Her eyes flicked, just once, before she stood. If that's all, I have work. Whimsy let her go. Frobisher leaned over. You believe them? I believe all of them. And none of them, Whimsy murmured. Each holds a piece. Klee with the page, Hume with her loyalty, Vexley with the meters, Brand with her restraint. And what ties them together? Whimsy's eyes narrowed. Fear. Each of them feared Witherington for different reasons. But fear breeds silence, and in that room, silence is never empty. He stood. We need the manuscript, all of it, not just the envelope in the drawer. I'd wager there's more. Frobisher frowned. Where? Where one always hides truth among scholars, Whimsy said. Not under lock and key, in plain sight, but encoded. He stepped to the door and added, We'll start with the library. The library of the Witherington Institute smelled faintly of dust and inkorderly rows of knowledge pressed tightly into silence. It was the kind of place where nothing screamed for attention. And yet Lord Peter Whimsy's eye caught the subtle call of disarray. A row of books on psychoacoustic's third shelf. West wall had 1 volume pressed just slightly deeper than the others. He tugged it free. Transmodal linguistics, perception beyond sense. Inside the cover, a folded sheet of parchment, a strange choice for a modern institute, bore Witherington's scrawl. In black ink. No heading, no date. Just lines of symbols and numbers. with a Latin phrase penned at the bottom, ad silentium pervosum mentis, to silence. By the voice of the mind, Whimsy raised an eyebrow. The symbols appeared to be an acoustic cipher, frequencies translated into characters, then arranged phonetically. A code made from the very essence of sound, rendered mute, ingenious, maddening. But what did it conceal? He left Frobisher to copy the cipher and returned to his rooms. There, amid the soft crackle of firelight, he unfolded his notebook and began, matching the cipher to known audio spectrums, hertz for vowels, decibels for consonants. What emerged, slowly, were words, not scientific, personal. They are stealing from me. I hear it in their silences. Clee waits for me to fall. Brand listens too closely. Even Harriet smiles too often. I trust none of them now. Whimsy sat back, lips pursed. Not a confession, a warning. Paranoia, perhaps, but not without structure. The document was dated in code, 3 days before Witherington's death. Time enough for him to act on it, or for someone else to silence him. He began untangling the web. Clee, always at his heels, co-authoring but never outshining. If Witherington was preparing to exclude him from the next big paper, possibly one containing a revolutionary theory, Clee might have feared academic obscurity. But then, why not confront him? Why not discredit his findings, unless he tried and failed? And unless Witherington had proof, Harriet, loyal to a fault, but even loyalty could be dangerous. She may have typed more than she admitted. What if she discovered something she didn't understand, or worse, something she did? Then there was Brand, she who stayed silent, the kind who observed, gathered, waited. Her reaction to the altered manuscript was telling. Cool, prepared to smooth. If she had reason to want Witherington discredited or dead, it would not be emotional. It would be surgical. Vexley, for all his anxious energy, had no reason to hate Witherington. But perhaps he feared him. Perhaps Witherington uncovered some failure in Vexley's calibration or used him to falsify results, and threatened to reveal it. Vexley's odd pulse reading at 750 was the only hint that someone was in the room before the body was found. But what connected them? Not just motives, opportunity. Whimsy pulled out the Institute's weekly rota, lecture times, staff duties, room availability. There it was, on the morning of the death. Clee had no verified alibi from 8 to 10 to 8:25. Vexley claimed to be in the EEG lab, but Brand was the only person who could confirm that, and she signed the logbook after 8:30, not before. Harriet's desk was unmanned between 8 and 9. The Morning Post untouched until 1/2 past. All had gaps. All had keys. The Quietest Room required no lock. It was electronically sealed. But access logs showed only Witherington's card. That meant one of two things. Either someone entered behind him or tampered with the system. Whimsey returned to the tech wing. Vexley was fiddling with cables, his back to the door. Curious thing, Whimsy said softly. Access logs are like polite doormen. They tell you who should be in the building, not who's hiding under the coat rack. Vexley jumped. I was just finishing diagnostics. Of course, just one question. The sound pressure spike at 750, was it vertical or lateral? Vexley frowned. What do you mean? Did it come from above or the side? He blinked. Side, left panel, towards the wiring conduit. Whimsy smiled. So someone tampered with the wall, not the door. Vexley paled. You didn't think to mention that. I didn't want to get blamed. For what? For letting someone in. Did someone ask you to suppress the data? A beat. Vexley nodded. Who? He hesitated. I don't know her first name, but she's on the ethics board. Only met her twice. Said it would be bad for funding if it looked like security was breached. Whimsy's brow furrowed. Ethics board, that hadn't come up before. He sought out the administrative files. The board had 5 members, external academics, and 1 internal voice, Dr. Eloise Brand. So she'd seen the logs. She'd warned Vexley. She'd erased the trail. Now Whimsy understood. Brand didn't need to kill for revenge or ambition. She needed to prevent scandal. If Witherington's new paper had exposed illegal test methods, unauthorized isolation experiments, perhaps Using volunteers beyond acceptable limits, it would have jeopardized everything. Research funding, careers, the Institute's very existence. And who typed that report? Harriet. Who co-wrote it? Clee. All of them, tied to the same secret. All of them, with reasons to fear exposure. But which one silenced Witherington? He needed proof, real proof. That night, Whimsy returned to the quietest room. He stepped inside, closed the door. The silence was absolute. It pushed in on him, as though the air itself were waiting for instruction. He stood perfectly still, remembering Witherington's words. I hear it in their silences. He waited. No voices, no illusions. But then beneath the silence a hum. Not from the walls, from the chair. The seat had been rigged. He removed the cushion. A tiny vibration emitter was affixed beneath, set to pulse every 30 seconds. An illusion of sound in total silence, not enough to drive a man mad, or to prove he wasn't. Whimsy exited, went straight to Frobisher. Witherington wasn't hallucinating, he said. Someone wanted him to think he was. But why? To destroy his credibility. To suggest he'd lost his grip. And then to ensure no one read the real draft. Not the doctored one. The one we haven't found yet. Frobisher blinked. You mean there's another? Oh yes, Whimsy said. And whoever killed him, they have it. The Institute's atmosphere shifted sharply the next morning. Gone was the grim hush of academic grief. In its place relief. Almost jubilation. Word had spread. Scotland Yard had found something. Chief Inspector Ordway, a man more comfortable with bolt cutters than Baudrillard, had summoned Lord Peter Whimsy to his office with a smirk that practically creaked. Got something for you, Whimsy, he said, dropping a sealed envelope onto the desk. Anonymous tip. Arrived this morning by post, no return address. But it changes everything. Whimsy opened the envelope with a finger of curiosity and a pinch of doubt. Inside, a glossy photograph. Witherington, arms crossed, in heated discussion with Clee outside the faculty lounge. Date stamped 3 days before the murder. On the back, scribbled in blocky pen, threatened to expose him. Clee snapped. Bit thin, wouldn't you say? Whimsy offered mildly. Not just that. Tipster also mentioned where we might find the missing draft hidden inside Clee's lab desk. We got a warrant, searched it, and lo and behold, bingo. He handed Whimsy a sheaf of crumpled pages. It was the original manuscript, no edits, no deletions, just Witherington's dense, brilliant prose, and in the margin, circled in red, a damning paragraph. It accused Clee of falsifying experimental data for their last joint paper. Quietly, obliquely, but unmistakably. That, Ordway said with pride, is motive. Whimsy nodded slowly, as if absorbing a blow rather than a breakthrough. And, you think Clee, what? Panicked. Killed him to prevent publication. He was alone at the right time. Access to the quietest room. Knows the equipment. Knew how to make it look like natural failure. Classic case of academic jealousy turned sour. Whimsy rose without argument. May I see Clee? The man was in one of the interview rooms. Head in hands, posture crumpled like paper soaked in rain. He didn't even look up as Whimsy entered. They say you killed him, Whimsy began softly. Because he was going to reveal your deception. Clee snorted. I've made many mistakes, Lord Peter. But not murder, and certainly not over that. He was going to name you in print. I knew that. He told me. That's why we fought. But I didn't care. It was true. I fudged the numbers. He wanted to pull the paper. I said fine. I deserved it. I thought that would be the end of it. You told anyone, only Brand. She was on the ethics board. She said it wouldn't affect the Institute. That it was better to handle it quietly. Said it wasn't criminal, just embarrassing. Whimsy's thoughts drifted back to the vibration emitter beneath the chair. A subtle manipulation. A campaign not to eliminate Witherington outright, but to destabilize him, inch by inch. And the paper, he said, holding up the manuscript. You hid it in your desk. No, I haven't seen that version since the day he died. But it was found in your office. Then someone put it there. Outside the room, Ordway was waiting like a dog by a sausage cart. Well, he didn't do it, Whimsy said bluntly. Ordway stiffened. You don't know that. I know enough. He admits to academic fraud, and yet not to murder. It doesn't Add up. His reaction isn't theatrical. It's exhausted. He had the manuscript, which could have been planted, the photo, convenient, anonymous. Why now? Why not the day of the murder? Ordway's lips thinned. Sometimes you don't want to admit you saw something until the danger's past, or until the trail needs a fresh body to follow. Ordway scowled. So what, you think the killer's still at large? I think someone is clever enough to orchestrate a false victory. They fed you a narrative that wraps things up tiddly to tiddly. He stepped outside and lit a cigarette, thoughts roiling like smoke. Clee's destruction was a decoy, a carefully prepared fall, which meant the real killer wasn't just hiding. They were planning their exit. He returned to his flat and reviewed everything again. The vibration device, the ciphered letter, the doctored draft, the real manuscript, and now this anonymous tip that just happens to appear at the moment. Doubt began creeping into the edges of the case. Someone was cleaning up, not reacting, anticipating. He turned back to Brand's name in his notebook. Always calm, always prepared. She'd warned Vexley, advised Clee, advised Witherington, no doubt, that everything could be handled quietly. She had access to both the original and the modified papers, and she had reason to fear scandal more than anyone. But had she killed for it, or had she merely protected the killer? That night, a second envelope arrived. No stamp, no address, just a single sheet, slid beneath his door. You're asking the wrong questions. The room was not silent. The silence was the weapon. Whimsy's skin prickled. This was no random taunt. It was a correction. The emitter in the chair was subtle, but not fatal, not alone. And Witherington's cause of death, neurological failure, remained peculiar. No poison, no trauma, just an inexplicable breakdown. He reached for his files and began cross-referencing the Institute's test protocols. Then he found it. An abandoned project in the archives. Code name, Sabora. Low-frequency resonance experiments, tests on how inaudible vibrations affected brainwaves. This continued 6 months ago after a series of test subjects reported disorientation, hallucinations, even seizures, all supervised by Dr. Brand. But the equipment had never been dismantled, just quietly filed away, marked as dormant. The quietest room wasn't silent. It was primed. He grabbed his coat and went back to the Institute. The corridors were dim, empty, shadows long. He moved quickly to the quietest room and unlocked it with the spare faculty key. Inside, he scanned the walls. Then, in the panel beside the chair, carefully concealed, he found it. The Sabora control module. Active, timed. And on the schedule, an upcoming experiment 2 days from now. Logged under a different name. The killer wasn't finished. They were planning to use the room again. Perhaps on another test subject. Perhaps on a witness who knew too much. Whimsy stood in the silence. He knew now. The real killer was still moving, still adjusting the board. And this false victory was just the first sleight of hand. The dawn came gray and low, smothered in a damp mist that clung to the city like a forgotten memory. Lord Peter Whimsy, having barely slept, stood by the window of his flat, staring down at the slow, muffled stir of London waking beneath. In his hands, the thin sheet from the anonymous note crinkled faintly with tension. The silence was the weapon, a phrase too deliberate to be metaphorical. It was a clue, not a riddle, and it had led him to Sabora, a discontinued project with suspiciously persistent echoes. Back at the Institute, the quietest room now loomed with a darker aura. Not a space for contemplation, but a refined stage for controlled harm. Brand had overseen Sabora. Clee had worked closely with her in neurosensory calibration. Witherington had published critiques of its ethical foundations years ago. But it wasn't just science at stake. There was something more personal lingering beneath the layers. In the cold light of morning, Whimsy returned to the archives, requesting access to faculty correspondence and board minutes from 6 years prior, around the time Sabora was shelved. He skimmed through documents, eyes narrowing over meetings marked confidential and files stamped with redacted summaries. A pattern emerged slowly, like bruises forming beneath thin skin. One entry caught his eye, a closed session discussing disciplinary measures against a doctoral researcher named Clara Mowbray. The name meant nothing to Whimsy, but the context didn't sit right. She had allegedly manipulated data from the early Sabora trials, and according to minutes, Witherington had strongly advocated for her expulsion. The vote had been split: Clee, silent, Brand, abstaining. He followed the trail further. Clara Mowbray had been quietly dismissed. No formal report, no press release, a polite vanishing. Intrigued, Whimsy hunted for her current whereabouts. It took time. Her records were fragmented, but eventually he discovered a recent application to the Institute's Research Visitors Program, submitted under a married name, Clara Mowbray Harper, approved by Brand, scheduled to begin a 2-week observational residency just last week. She had been on site when Witherington died. Whimsy sought out the guest log and found her signature. Small, elegant, recently penned. She had arrived 2 days before the murder and departed the very next evening, citing an unexpected illness. Her file bore no forwarding address. She had left nothing behind except, perhaps, her vengeance. He returned to Inspector Ordway, whose triumph had dulled in the shadow of growing inconsistencies. "You missed a visitor," Whimsy said plainly. Clara Mowbray, former researcher, dismissed under scandal, tied to Sabora's darkest hour. Ordway frowned. "That was years ago. You think she came back to settle a score?" "I think she came back to observe, to make sure the weapon she'd once helped develop would finish what she'd always believed Witherington had stolen from her. Her future. Why leave so quickly? Because she knew the moment Witherington collapsed that it had worked. The death wouldn't be blamed on her. She'd ensured her signature was light. Everything pointed to Clee, a tidy end, just like her disgrace had been, and Brand approved her access, perhaps knowingly, perhaps not. But I don't believe she's ignorant. Brand is a woman of precision. That kind of oversight doesn't happen without intent." Ordway rubbed his jaw. "You want her brought in?" "Not yet. I want to see how far the past still reaches." He made discreet inquiries through academic channels, contacting former Sabora staff. Most had scattered into unrelated careers. Some refused to talk. But one Dr. Marcus Elvey, a data technician now teaching at a provincial college, agreed to speak under condition of anonymity. "Elvey," Whimsy asked, "what exactly happened to Mowbray?" "She got scapegoated," came the terse reply. "Yes, she cut corners, but we all did. Pressure was massive. We were racing to outpace a competing lab in Zurich. The ethics review flagged results, but Brand pushed it through anyway. Witherington, he didn't just report it, he made it personal. Publicly denounced her, called her a fraud at a symposium. She was blackballed after that. Couldn't get a research post anywhere in Europe. And Clee, quiet, always, was smart but conflict-averse. He followed Brand's lead. And Brand's lead? She protected the program. Sabora was her legacy. Clara was collateral. Whimsy sat in silence for a moment, absorbing the weight of it. Clara had returned, not simply for revenge, but to claim power over those who had erased her. And the Quietest Room, once a stage for theoretical inquiry, had become a theater for reckoning. He returned to the Institute again that evening, this time requesting a meeting with Brand directly. She met him in her office, calm, immaculate, the scent of lavender hovering like a practiced mask. "I assume you're not here to talk about scheduling," she said. "No, I'm here about Clara Mowbray." Brand's eyes flickered, not with surprise, but with the calculation of someone mentally rearranging pieces on a board. "I see. She was here. You approved her visit. She requested access to study neural resilience models. Her credentials were adequate, and her connection to Sabora." Brand gave a tight smile. "Ancient history. And not my concern anymore." "Convenient," Whimsy said, "especially when history has a way of repeating itself. She was in the building when Witherington died, and now evidence is falling into place so neatly. One might almost forget there's a past behind the present." Brand folded her hands. "What are you accusing me of?" "Nothing," he said softly. "Not yet. But you've spent a career perfecting silence, haven't you? Whether by design or denial. I'm just wondering if this time someone else used that silence against you." For the first time, a fissure formed in her composure. "She lost everything," Brand said finally, "because she didn't understand the game. We all compromise. That's how the system works, perhaps." Whimsy said, rising. But some ghosts don't care about systems. They only care about being heard. He left her there, still as stone. The past wasn't done speaking, and the silence-true silence was never quite what it seemed. Lord Peter Wimsey sat alone in the quietest room once more. No lights, no sound. Only the faint hum of his own thoughts filling the engineered silence. It had a disarming effect, stripping away the theater of distraction, forcing focus. That, he reasoned, was the key. The quietest room was not just a setting, it was a crucible. And in it, masks melted. He leaned forward and activated the small control panel embedded in the wall. Though Sabora had been shelved, the system still responded. A flicker of code, a flicker of sound. A stored calibration file appeared, labeled MH Loop. That wasn't a system designation. It was a person's name, Mowbray Harper. He transferred the file to a secure drive and exited, careful not to leave a trace. The halls outside were quiet, but not silent. Conversations echoed faintly down corridors, doors clicked shut. Every corner felt watched, though no one was there. That evening, he invited Inspector Ordway and Dr. Klee to the Institute's lower testing chamber, where a prototype version of Sabora's neural interface still functioned under controlled parameters. Brand refused to attend, citing illness, but Wimsey suspected she simply didn't want to witness what he was about to try. They gathered around the central module, its sleek chassis and curved seat resembling more a dentist's chair than a scientific marvel. "You want me to sit in that?" Klee asked, his voice strained. Wimsey gestured calmly. "It's harmless in its current state. Only monitoring, no feedback loop, no sensory input. I need a baseline reading. Just 5 minutes." Ordway looked skeptical but nodded. Klee hesitated, then slowly sat, placing the slim cap of electrodes atop his head. "What are we looking for?" the inspector asked. "A reaction," Wimsey murmured. "Not in the data, in the man." He keyed in the MH Loop file, which initiated a playback sequence of Clara Mowbray's original voice calibration recordings. Soft, deliberate sentences played in her voice, neutral phrases, meant to test user response in a silent environment. "I trust the silence," said the voice. Klee flinched, barely perceptible, but there, a twitch beneath his left eye. "Next. The silence is where the truth lives." Klee's hands curled slightly, as though grasping invisible tension. "And then, they took everything from me. They took everything from us." Klee's head jerked up. He tore off the headset and stood abruptly. "What is this?" he demanded, voice cracking. "You said this was scientific." "It is," Wimsey replied coolly. "Psychological science." She was manipulating the system, Klee stammered. Even then, planting statements, emotional seeds. Subroutines weren't meant to carry personal messages. "But this loop wasn't flagged by anyone on the research team," Wimsey countered. "And you didn't report it. Why?" Klee's mouth opened and shut, caught in a silent loop of his own. "Because you knew," Wimsey said quietly. "You knew what Clara had encoded, and you left it. Maybe even admired it. A touch of rebellion." "I didn't think she'd come back," Klee whispered. "Ah," said Wimsey. "So she did reach out to you." Klee's silence was answer enough. "She contacted you when she returned, didn't she? Asked about the quietest room, about Witherington's routine." She'd already planned it. Klee sank into the nearest chair, his resolve unspooling. "She said he wouldn't suffer, that it would be elegant, that it would make the system complete again. She still believed Sabora could do something good if it was just in the right hands. And you agreed." "I didn't help her," Klee said quickly. "But I didn't stop her either. She said she only wanted to observe the room's response. But when he died, I knew she'd done it." Wimsey's voice dropped to a whisper. "Then why not speak up?" "Because part of me thought he deserved it." The room fell silent, true silence, for a heartbeat. Klee sat with his guilt laid bare, no longer a scientist, but a man unraveled. "I'll need a signed statement," Ordway said quietly. "I'll write it," Klee replied. As they left the chamber, Wimsey lingered a moment, staring at the chair and its slumbering circuitry. The unconventional clue hadn't been a fingerprint or a hidden camera, but the human mind itself, how it reacts, hides, and reveals under pressure. Clara Mowbray had weaponized silence, but it was guilt that cracked the facade. The Quietest Room had finally spoken, and what it revealed was far louder than sound. They were barely 2 hours into transcribing Clee's confession when chaos struck. A low-priority technician, one of the night staff, rushed into Inspector Ordway's temporary office, white-faced and breathless, muttering something about the archive core and internal wipe. Lord Peter Wimsey was on his feet before the man had finished the sentence. They followed him down the metal spine of the Institute's lower levels, passing through secure doors that required triple authorization. The archive core held all system logs, biometric access records, and user footprints across every Sabora test cycle, raw evidence, in effect, of everything Clara Mowbray might have done before or after Witherington's death. The technician swiped his ID, and the doors hissed open. The moment Wimsey stepped inside, he knew. The core's ambient lights, usually a steady blue, blinked erratically in crimson. Two server towers had been powered down. A third flashed a maintenance code. A fourth, a compact data cradle, sat open and utterly empty. The internal storage drive was gone. Ordway swore under his breath. Sabotage, Wimsey said flatly. The technician stammered. I was only gone 10 minutes. It was clean when I left. I just went to the canteen. That's enough, Ordway said. Call internal security. Seal the building. But it was too late. Whoever had taken the data was long gone or well hidden. Wimsey moved swiftly to the wall terminal and pulled up a backup access log. Nothing. Every file associated with the drive had been scrubbed. Authorizations, timestamps, even physical access pings. That was no casual theft. Someone had exploited deep system knowledge to erase their own trail. Clara couldn't have done this. She was under surveillance and had no access. Clee, perhaps. But he was still in custody and clearly unraveling. Wimsey tapped his fingers on the console, retracing the timeline. Only a handful of staff even knew the core layout. He recalled something Clara once said in passing. The system is only as silent as the people maintaining it. It had to be someone overlooked, a background figure, invisible, who had auxiliary clearance. He asked the technician, not the top researchers, maintenance, data runners, people who wouldn't raise suspicion. I can get a list, do it. Now. He turned to Ordway. We need to interview them immediately. I'll start with the newest hires. But as the list printed from the wall terminal, one name caught Wimsey's eye and his breath faltered. Greta Voss. She'd barely spoken during the investigation, a background analyst attached to the ethics committee. Her role was always peripheral audits, reporting compliance, trailing meetings with a clipboard. She'd been present when Witherington's schedule was reviewed, present when Clee requested system resets, present when Brand outlined her dismissal of Clara's return. Voss had been everywhere and nowhere, and yet, not once had she volunteered anything, not even when directly asked. Wimsey reached her personnel file. It had been updated an hour ago. A forwarding address, a resignation timestamp. She's gone. He said aloud, left the Institute just after Clee cracked. That's impossible, Ordway replied. We had eyes on every exit. She didn't use the exits. Wimsey's voice sharpened. She used the mail chute. It took another 10 minutes to confirm Greta Voss had placed a standard Institute courier bin on the outbound manifest, declaring it as obsolete biometric. Modules to be degassed off-site. No one had checked. Why would they? It was routine. Sealed under Departmental Code X 1 to 93 Clee's clearance level. By the time security reached the sorting station, the courier van was gone. I want checkpoints alerted from here to Oxford. Ordway snapped, already dialing. And notify rail terminals. We'll widen to ports if needed. Wimsey stared at the manifest log, absorbing the brutal simplicity of it all. The truth hadn't been destroyed, but it had been removed, just as it had begun to surface, and by someone who had watched the entire investigation from the shadows, weighing her moment. Brand stormed in shortly after, her composure frayed. I just heard. What in God's name happened? A shadow in your house, Wimsey replied. Coolly, you had a saboteur on your payroll. She scoffed. Voss, no. She was loyal, methodical. We barely used her. Exactly. You never saw her coming. Brand turned away, lips pursed. Whether in guilt or disbelief, Wimsey couldn't tell. And now, without the core archive. Clee's statement stood as hearsay. Clara's manipulations couldn't be traced digitally, and Witherington's death once again settled into the domain of plausible accident, cloaked in technological mystery. The evidence was always digital. Whimsy said aloud. It never had weight, never took up space. And now, like sound in the quietest room, it's vanished into the vacuum. Ordway rubbed his temple. She had to be working with someone. She was, Whimsy said, but not Clara, not Clee. Someone else, someone still here. He could feel it. The case wasn't closed, only deeper. The saboteur hadn't silenced them. She'd merely delayed the reckoning. But that was enough. The game had shifted, and now trust already fragile began to fracture. Whimsy looked at Brand. From now on, no assumptions. Not about allies, not about enemies. Every whisper matters, because somewhere, someone still wanted the quietest room to stay silent. The wind off the Thames had grown sharp, needling through Lord Peter Whimsy's coat as he stood outside the Sabora Institute just past midnight. The building behind him slept in a sullen hush, darkened windows like lidded eyes. Inside, the investigation had stalled, evidence gone, leads cold. And now Greta Voss vanished into the folds of night with the Institute's deepest secret. Whimsy lit a cigarette with fingers that barely trembled. He hated losing the scent, and he hated knowing someone had anticipated every move. Yet there was something in that anticipation that didn't sit right. Greta Voss's disappearance had been too tidy, clean in a way no crime born of emotion ever was, and Clara, still protesting her innocence, seemed genuinely bewildered by the turn of events. The pieces didn't align, not yet. He returned to his temporary quarters in the East Wing, a converted office suite with bare furniture and unkind lighting. A file sat on the desk, freshly delivered by Sergeant Schilling before he went off duty. A collated analysis of Voss's background. Whimsy opened it with mild expectation until the third page. Voss had changed her name. Her birth identity, Margarethe van Zyl, former intern at the European Neurointegrative Research Directorate. One of the original Sabora pilot test volunteers. The same pilot program where Thomas Witherington had conducted his earliest private trials. Whimsy's cigarette froze mid-air. There it was, not sabotage, but vengeance, not theft, but retribution, the old echo, returning. The door to his room burst open so violently it slammed against the inner wall. Inspector Ordway stood panting, face pallid beneath the brim of his hat. Whimsy, come, now, what's happened? Brand. Ordway croaked, she's gone. They ran. Back to the Institute, to the executive floor. In the hallway outside Dr. Brand's office, to junior officers held back a crowd of murmuring staff. Inside, the lights were on, the desk untouched, the window open, and blood. A single smear, small but unmistakable, arched beside the window sill. No sign of a struggle, no broken glass, no scattered papers. Just the quietness of a place that had suddenly lost its center of gravity. Whimsy stepped to the open window and looked down. 3 floors, a hedge border, no body. She didn't fall. He said. No, said Ordway, pointing to the sill. She climbed or was helped. Whimsy crouched. Latex tread marks, light, small-footed. So she left willingly, or someone made it look that way. They found her phone on her desk, still powered. No outgoing calls. Her handbag still hung on the coat stand. Nothing useful. Then the note was found, tucked beneath her keyboard. Wimsey. No more silence. He's alive. That was all. No signature. No date. Not even a context. But the meaning hit like thunder. Who's alive? Ordway asked. Whimsy didn't answer. Instead, he walked from the room like a man heading toward a precipice. He returned to the East Wing, to the Sabora logs, what was left of them, and retrieved what he could of Clara's test schedule. Then he matched them to Witherington's appointment book, salvaged during the first sweep, and he found it. 3 days before Witherington's death, Brand had overridden the appointment schedule and booked a one-on-one session in Chamber 4B. Not with Clara, with someone labeled simply as J. Turek. The designation was internal, obscure. Schilling. Whimsy called. The sergeant appeared, eyes wide. Find out what J. Turek refers to in the Sabora log structure. It took minutes. And then, J. Turek is a dormant profile, redacted file, but it was tagged to the Daniel Cresswell. Whimsy froze. Cresswell, he whispered. But Cresswell died 5 years ago. Apparently not, said Schilling. The shock uncoiled slowly, like a serpent stirring in the grass. Daniel Cresswell had been the lead neurocognitive architect. In Sabora's first iteration, a genius with no moral anchor, removed after early ethical breaches. Officially, he died in a lab accident burnout, they'd said. A hardware overload. But no death certificate existed. No body had been publicly confirmed. And if he was alive and buried in the system as J. Turek, then this wasn't sabotage. It was revenge from a ghost. Whimsy turned to Schilling. Issue a silent internal alert. Do not inform the staff. Scan the campus for heat signatures. Check every sealed room, every system bunker. Cresswell might be here or might have never left. A flurry of movement followed. Infrared sweeps. Departmental queries. But before the hour closed, they had another call from the northern courtyard. Dr. Brand's coat had been found, folded, neatly beneath the garden statue of Athena. Beneath it, a torn scrap of paper. He never died. He waited, and in the statue's hand a listening device, plucked from a Sabora calibration node. He heard everything, Whimsy whispered. The enemy wasn't ahead. He was underneath, embedded in the system. Cresswell had likely lived within the very tech they'd used to simulate consciousness, manipulating protocols, hiding behind code. Greta Voss hadn't stolen data, she'd delivered it to a phantom, already inside the walls. And now Brand was gone, likely taken, possibly turned. The wind stirred again, colder than before, and Lord Peter Whimsy realized he was no longer solving a murder. He was in a race to stop one. The next one. The morning fog that clung to the cobblestones outside the Sabora Institute seemed reluctant to lift, as if the very atmosphere resisted the unveiling of truths buried deep within its walls. Lord Peter Whimsy sat quietly in his modest office, a faint aroma of burnt tobacco lingering from his last cigarette. The events of the night pressed heavily on his mind. The disappearance of Dr. Brand, the ghostly specter of Daniel Cresswell, still haunting the Institute's corridors, and the ominous warning that the villain was still playing a game several moves ahead. Yet, amidst the chaos, the detective's gaze lingered on a small, unassuming detail that had surfaced in the previous days, but had been dismissed too readily. The peculiar pattern of coffee cups left behind after meetings. It had been Greta Voss's habit. It seemed to leave her half-empty cup on the edge of her desk, tilted just so. A tiny chip on the rim evident, but never repaired. Clara had mentioned it in passing, more as a quirk than a clue, and it was quickly forgotten amid grander discoveries. But now, with the urgency mounting, Whimsy's mind circled back to it, threading the loose ends with the persistence of a spider weaving its web. He stood abruptly, cross-checking the Institute's visitor logs and meeting schedules, meticulously noting every occasion on which Greta, Brand, Clara, and others had interacted in the days before the first murder. His eyes darted over the names and times until something flickered, an entry marked as a late-night debrief involving Brand and Cresswell's alias, J. Turek. The record was curiously incomplete. No notes, no follow-up, and yet a fresh coffee cup was logged in the cleaning roster, unaccounted for by any other visitor. Schilling. Whimsy called through the phone, collate all coffee cup sightings, times and locations, with particular focus on the nights leading up to the incidents. I want the precise placement of each. The sergeant responded promptly, and minutes later, a pattern emerged. The chip in the cup was unique, traced only to a single source, a rare Dutch porcelain manufacturer, favored exclusively by Daniel Cresswell during his tenure in Europe. The cups had been delivered to the Institute under Clara's name. Whimsy frowned. Clara's earlier claims of innocence now wavered under this microscopic spotlight. Why would she have Cresswell's favored cup at her disposal? And why had the Institute staff reported seeing her handle it with unusual care? He recalled the tension in Clara's demeanor when questioned, to careful, to rehearsed. It was the kind of subtle act practiced by those who must cover truths buried deep. But Clara was not a suspect yet, not until more evidence emerged. Turning his attention back to the coffee cups, Whimsy pondered the time intervals. Every cup, appeared during or immediately after meetings involving either Brand or Greta. It was almost as if the cup was a silent witness, a subtle vessel carrying messages beneath the hum of scientific jargon. His thoughts were interrupted by a quiet knock at the door. Clara stood there, pale but composed. "Lord Peter," she said softly, "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all," Whimsy replied, motioning her inside. "I wanted to speak with you further." She nodded, her eyes flicking to the desk where the cup rested on a coaster. "I suppose you've noticed the cups." "I have," he said gently. "Do you care to explain?" Clara swallowed. "The cups were a gift. From a man I met years ago in Europe, Daniel Cresswell. Before the Institute. Before everything. He was brilliant but dangerous." Whimsy leaned forward. "Did you know he was alive?" Her face twisted in pain. "No one knew. At least, no one thought he was. When I discovered his alias within the Sabora files, I feared the worst, but I never imagined he would reach this far." The conversation was interrupted by Schilling's hurried entrance. "Sir, you'll want to see this." He handed Whimsy a small, folded paper found inside Brand's personal notebook during a discreet search. The note read, "The cups mark the path. Follow the bitter taste." Whimsy's eyes narrowed. The bitter taste was no metaphor. It was a coded hint that only someone involved with the coffee cups could understand. He asked Schilling to gather the samples from the recent meetings and send them for chemical analysis. Within the hour, results arrived. Traces of a rare, fast-acting sedative had been detected in the coffee from the meetings where Brand was present. The sedative was odorless, tasteless, and its symptoms closely mimicked exhaustion or stress. Suddenly, the pieces began to snap into place. Cresswell had not only hidden behind the name J. Turek, manipulating the system from within, but he had also used the sedated coffee cups as tools to weaken his targets. Greta Voss had likely discovered this and tried to warn Brand, who was now missing. Clara, bound by past loyalty and fear, had been unwittingly complicit or perhaps forced to play a role under duress. Whimsy's mind raced. If Brand was incapacitated in this manner, then who had taken her, and why? He returned to the Institute's security logs, searching for access records matching the timing of the last coffee consumption. An unexpected anomaly surfaced. A maintenance worker, presumed off-duty, had badge access to the restricted chambers precisely when the coffee had been served. Whimsy requested a profile on the worker, an unremarkable man named Henry Latham, with a clean record but an obscure past involving security contracts overseas. It was a tenuous lead, but enough to spark a breakthrough. Whimsy convened with Ordway and Schilling. "Latham is our shadow. He's the link between the physical and digital realms Cresswell controls. He may have been tasked with protecting Cresswell's continued existence, or silencing those who threatened it," Ordway added grimly. Whimsy agreed and immediately set plans in motion for a covert surveillance operation, focused on Latham's movements and communications. As dusk fell once again, the detective stood by the window, watching the Institute's silhouette against the fading light. The pattern was clear now, not in grand gestures, but in the smallest details. The cups, the sedative, the caretaker's mask of innocence, all intertwined to reveal a ghost's hold on the present. And the game was far from over. Somewhere inside those walls, the true enemy waited, confident that the quietest room was still his domain. But Lord Peter Whimsy was determined to prove otherwise. The rain came with a grim persistence, a steady hiss against the windows of Lord Peter Whimsy's office as he reviewed the transcripts from Latham's intercepted communications. Every coded message, every GPS ping and brief exchange led to one inescapable conclusion. Latham was Cresswell's operative, a silent hand moving through the Institute's hallways, ensuring that Daniel Cresswell's influence remained intact long after his supposed demise. But what haunted Whimsy more than Cresswell's survival was the looming question of why. What could drive a man to fake his death, infiltrate a scientific institute under an alias, sedate colleagues, and orchestrate a murder cloaked in silence? It was Clara who provided the first fracture in the enigma, not through a confession, but by what she failed to say. During another quiet interview in Whimsy's study, she broke down unexpectedly, not over guilt or fear, but over memory. He said it wasn't just about the science, she whispered, eyes glazed and unfocused. He said they had taken something from him, something no theory or paper could restore. Whimsy leaned forward. Who took what? Clara. But she shut down after that, retreating into silence. Later that night, Whimsy returned to the files stolen from Latham's encrypted flash drive. Among the administrative data and surveillance footage was a private letter never sent, never printed, written in Cresswell's unmistakable cadence, addressed to no one in particular. It was a confession, or perhaps a manifesto. They silenced my work, buried it under bureaucracy, and rewrote my name out of their records. My formula my mind used, discarded, repackaged under another's credentials. And now they prosper while I rot in the shadows. Whimsy read the letter 3 times. The motive wasn't purely vengeance against the Institute. It was personal, intimately personal. The Sabora Institute hadn't merely disagreed with Cresswell's research, they had plagiarized him, stripped his name from his own discoveries, then cast him out when he refused to comply with ethical restrictions on neurological experimentation. Greta Voss, then a junior member of the Oversight Committee, had voted to suppress his data. Dr. Brand had supported the motion. Clara had remained silent, which to Cresswell was betrayal enough. The letter closed with a phrase chilling in its calmness: if they deny me legacy, I will take their future. It was only then Whimsy understood the scale. Cresswell's vendetta wasn't fueled by ambition alone, it was the desperation of a man obsessed with being remembered. His work had aimed to map and manipulate silence in the human brain, to locate the neurological centers that process trauma, secrets, and suppressed memories. He had wanted to isolate the human conscience like a faulty wire. He believed the Institute had stolen and diluted his formula, and now he meant to reclaim it, or destroy those who misused it. Whimsy summoned Schilling and Ordway. This is no longer just murder or sabotage, he said. It's a campaign. He's erasing them, one by one, those who rewrote his legacy. That's why Greta died. That's why Brand vanished. He's not just silencing them, he's using their bodies, their neurological data, to perfect the technique they denied him. Cresswell wants to prove he was right all along. Ordway's face darkened. A revenge driven by the erasure of identity. Whimsy nodded. He isn't after fame anymore. He wants to overwrite their memories in the world, to hollow them out. The Quietest Room wasn't just a metaphor. It was his theory, his ultimate test chamber. At that moment, Clara appeared at the door again, white as chalk. I remember now, she said, voice trembling. The trial. What trial? Whimsy asked sharply. The original experiment, she said, before he was discredited. He tested it on a single patient without approval. A woman. She lost her speech, her memories, herself. We covered it up. The Institute didn't want scandal. That's why they buried him. That's what he means by silence. Whimsy stared at her. Who was the woman? I don't know. He never gave a name, just initials. The room fell into a heavy pause. Then Schilling, standing by the record's desk, gasped softly. Sir, that name came up yesterday. SR was the identifier code for one of our early volunteers in the neurological database. The field's been wiped since. But wait. He fumbled through the backups, fingers trembling. Here, SR Simone Rakewell. She was Cresswell's former partner. Disappeared in 1926 after a nervous breakdown. Her family assumed suicide. Whimsy's breath caught. Simone Rakewell had been Cresswell's muse, his collaborator and his first victim. The motive was complete now. The Institute had not only stolen Cresswell's work, but forced him to destroy the one person who had believed in it. The test had failed. Simone's mind had broken under his formula, and the committee's cover-up pushed Cresswell to the brink. That was the moment he became the ghost of the Institute. Whimsy stood, gathering the final threads. Send word to all staff. We close down every lab tonight. Full lockdown. Latham is Cresswell's hand. But Cresswell himself, he never left. Not truly. Ordway hesitated. You think he's still inside the Institute? Whimsy looked toward the hall where silence had always lingered longest. I think he's always been in the Quietest Room. The night air hung with that heavy stillness before a storm. as if the world itself had paused in breathless anticipation. Lord Peter Wimsey stood in the corridor outside the soundproofed chamber they once called the quietest room, now stripped of its mystique, its technological prowess laid bare. The panels buzzed faintly with dormant electricity waiting to be reawakened. Beside him stood Inspector Ordway and Dr. Schilling, faces grim. Every man present understanding this was no longer about mere justice. It was a reckoning. Wimsey had spent the better part of the afternoon preparing the room not with guards or guns, but with truth. Every speaker wired, every monitor engaged, every trace of Cresswell's original formula recompiled from fragments, found in Clara's archived notes and Latham's decrypted files, not to recreate the crime, but to confront its creator in the only language he still respected, control. Latham had been released earlier that morning, a calculated move. Wimsey had let slip loudly and with purpose that all data on Project Sabora had been consolidated into a secure backup, locked within the chamber. The bait gleamed with irresistible symmetry. The sight of Cresswell's erasure now promised the return of his legacy. They didn't wait long. Just past midnight, the door creaked open, silent as a breath, and Daniel Cresswell stepped inside. He looked nothing like the photo's time and hatred had remade him. Gaunt, ghost-like, he bore the manner of a man who had lived too long in his own mind. He moved with cautious precision, eyes flitting across the room, absorbing each detail, each echo of the world he once commanded. His hand hovered over the panel. He didn't speak. Wimsey stepped from the shadow. "Good evening, Dr. Cresswell." The man froze. For the first time, uncertainty clouded his expression. "You should be dead," Cresswell murmured. "And yet here I am," Wimsey replied, coolly, "much like yourself." There was no surprise in Cresswell's face, only a growing recognition that the performance was over. The walls, the stage, even the script had been taken from him. "I presume you've read the letter," Cresswell said. "Every line." "A tragic blend of genius and delusion," Wimsey replied, stepping closer. "But it was never about the Institute stealing your work. It was about losing her, Simone." A twitch, barely perceptible, but Wimsey saw it. "She believed in you," Wimsey continued. "She was your first volunteer, wasn't she? Before any of this? Before silence became your obsession. She was silence," Cresswell whispered. "Her mind, her pain, it was pure data, uninterrupted, untouched by the noise of ego or vanity. She offered me everything, and you destroyed her," Wimsey said. "You tested a theory without safeguards, watched her unravel, and then blamed the world for turning its back on you." "She begged me to continue," Cresswell hissed, his voice cracking. "You think I did this out of ambition? They took her from me, branded me mad, and then had the gall to profit from my formula. The room, the technology, it's mine. Every neuron they mapped came from my ideas." Wimsey let the silence stretch, let the man hang in his own fury. "You killed Greta Voss because she voted against reinstating your research. You erased Brand because he falsified funding records to continue it without you. Clara," he hesitated, "you spared because she still remembered Simone." Cresswell turned his back, face to the monitors. "You're clever, but not clever enough. You still don't understand what I've built. The quietest room," Wimsey said softly, stepping forward. "A place where memory, guilt, and identity can be muted. A room that doesn't just record silence, it imposes it." Cresswell smiled, sad and hollow. "And now I shall prove it works. You'll walk out forgetting this conversation ever happened." He reached for the console, but it didn't respond. He tapped again. Nothing. Wimsey held up a brass switch, small and mechanical. "Manual override." "I don't trust electricity with souls, you see." Cresswell lunged. Wimsey was ready. They collided, and the older man fought with surprising ferocity. But the years of isolation had eaten at his strength. Ordway burst in, restraining him as Cresswell thrashed and cursed, spitting like a man possessed. "Do you know what you've done?" he screamed. "You've doomed them all. That formula was salvation. Noise is the disease. Noise is his." Words cut off as Ordway secured the cuffs. He slumped to the floor, panting, spent. Wimsey stood over him, heart pounding. "You built a machine to erase pain," he said. "But all you did was bottle it. You turned grief into a weapon. You turned memory into a tomb. Cresswell looked up, and for a moment, something human flickered behind his eyes. Regret, recognition, whimsy could not say. Outside, dawn was beginning to bleed into the sky, gray and cold. The Institute would wake to find its silence broken at last. Cresswell would face trial not only for murder, but for what he'd tried to do to memory itself. As he was led away, whimsy turned once more to the console. He flipped a final switch, and the speakers inside the quietest room crackled to life, not with silence, but with the quiet hum of the world returning. Not all wounds can be erased. Not all noise is harmful. Sometimes the truest healing begins when the silence ends. Lord Peter Wimsey was not one for sentiment, but as the doors to the quietest room shut for good, sealed this time with more than just bolts and steel, he allowed himself the smallest exhale of satisfaction. Cresswell was in custody. The puzzle had been solved, the pieces set into their proper places, and the Institute would resume its mission, albeit with more humility than before, or so it seemed. It was early evening when the call came, a subtle ping from a secured channel that bypassed all standard routes. Bunter handed him the phone with an inscrutable look. "From Clara Holdan, my lord." Whimsy answered, already sensing the shift in atmosphere. Clara's voice was steady but low, as if she were speaking from behind a veil. "I think I've made a mistake," she said without preamble. "Something you need to see." I went back to the archived logs, not the main data, but Simone's private research diaries, hidden in a subdirectory, password protected. Whimsy frowned. Simone's logs, I thought they were sealed after her death. So did I, but they weren't sealed, they were buried. Within the hour, he was back at the Institute, Clara ushering him into her office, where the monitors glowed pale blue in the dark. On screen, scrolling lines of text unfurled. Simone. Cresswell's personal logbook, timestamped and authenticated. Her voice echoed in audio snippets, weary and frightened, recounting sessions inside the prototype quiet room, long before anyone else knew it existed. "I tried to stop him," she said in one entry, "but Daniel won't listen. He thinks the silence is beautiful, pure, but it's wrong. The machine doesn't cleanse the mind, it fractures it." Another entry, "He's begun running sessions on himself. I'm afraid, if he loses himself completely, I don't know what he'll become." And then the final one, "If anything happens to me, tell Jonas. Tell him to never trust Daniel." Whimsy's breath hitched. "Jonas?" Clara looked up. "That's what I was trying to tell you. There's no Jonas listed anywhere in her public file. No brother, no husband. But I did some digging. She had a son." The implication dropped like a stone in cold water. Clara clicked to a photo. An old academic group image. Simone, Cresswell, a few others, one face, slightly younger, stood to the edge. Whimsy leaned closer. His blood turned to ice. It was Dr. Nathan Ordway. "Impossible." Whimsy whispered. "Not impossible," Clara said. "Just well hidden. Ordway changed his name when he entered the program. Quietly, no fuss. But he was with Simone during her final project. He even helped with her early data collection under a research alias. I only found the connection because Simone's will named him as beneficiary. Quietly, anonymously." Whimsy stood slowly. "He's been one step ahead of us this entire time, and Cresswell never suspected. Or if he did, he didn't live long enough to say." A chime interrupted them, a security alert. One of the upper-level servers was being accessed remotely. "Who else is in the building?" Whimsy demanded. "Clara. Check the logs, only us, and Ordway." The corridors of the Institute had never felt so long. Whimsy and Clara hurried toward the server hub, housed in a side annex of the data wing. As they neared the glass doors, they saw him, Ordway, standing still as a statue, eyes fixed on the terminal, lips moving as though reciting something under his breath. Whimsy entered with deliberate calm. "Dr. Ordway, or should I say Jonas?" Ordway didn't flinch. "You should have left it buried." "I don't like buried things," Whimsy said softly. "They have a way of surfacing." Ordway turned slowly, sadness etched deep in his face. "He destroyed her, not just with the machine. He took everything good she had and twisted it. I joined this institute to keep watch, to ensure his work never saw light again." And yet you let it continue. I had to. It was the only way to control it. I sabotaged what I could, slowed down trials, but then Bran got greedy. Clara was too trusting, Greta too principled, and Cresswell, he came back. I couldn't risk him retaking control. You leaked the letter, Whimsy said, realization dawning. You wanted us to chase Cresswell, to take the focus off you. I wanted him stopped, Ordway snapped. I never wanted blood. But once Greta was gone, and Bran, the game changed. Cresswell had become what he always feared, a prophet with no audience. And prophets are dangerous when ignored. Whimsy studied him carefully. You could have come forward, told the truth, and what? Be tried for complicity, lose what remained of Simone's work. She gave her life trying to tame the machine. I wasn't going to let it be buried as madness. Clara spoke then, quietly. You wanted to finish what she started. Ordway didn't deny it. You're wrong, Whimsy said, stepping forward. Simone's legacy wasn't the machine. It was the warning. Silence fell between them. Then Ordway reached for a small drive on the console slowly, deliberately, and handed it to Whimsy. Everything's here, he said. The unedited logs, her real notes. If you destroy them, so be it. But read them first. Whimsy took the drive. No handcuffs, no alarms. Just a man who'd lived too long in shadow, finally stepping into the dim light. Later, as he watched Ordway being led away peaceful, almost grateful, Whimsy turned the drive over in his fingers. The last twist, perhaps, or the first page of something new. The case was closed. But silence, it seemed, still had stories left to tell. The press would call it closure. And for most, that was enough. Daniel Cresswell dead. Greta Lang murdered by a man thought to be the monster. Bran disgraced. The quiet room sealed. And Dr. Jonas Ordway Simone's hidden son held accountable for his duplicity. The story made sense. It had symmetry. It had consequence. But Lord Peter Whimsy knew better. The final piece didn't fit. Not entirely. He stared at the transcript one last time. Simone's final audio log, her voice tight with fear, layered with resignation. There was something in the cadence, a repetition in the word fracture, not metaphorical, clinical. I believe the quiet room does not erase thoughts, she had said. It breaks the order of them, leaves only the silence between. And Ordway had known. That much was clear. But whether he'd killed to protect that truth or merely to stall it from becoming something worse was less certain. Whimsy sat in his study 3 days after the events. The drive from Ordway inserted into a locked-down terminal. Clara had left it with him before resigning, unable to reconcile her role in the mess. The logs were maddeningly incomplete, redactions where full thoughts should be, interruption of data, as though someone or something had severed parts of Simone's journal mid-sentence. Until now, a new string of code had emerged after decrypting the last entry. Project Echo 9. External replication model initiated. Prototype removed. He leaned back. Prototype removed, but no record of it in the Institute. No trace of shipping or disposal. He dug deeper, calling up internal transport logs under restricted directories. A falsified requisition order. Internal lab clearance signed off. Not by Cresswell, not by Brand, not even by Ordway, but by an old name. One that hadn't come up once during the investigation. Dr. Rupert Cavell. He had left the Institute 3 years ago. Quietly. No scandal. No noise. A quiet retirement. But he had been Simone's colleague in the first version of the Quiet Room, the original theory. He had disappeared from the narrative far too easily. Whimsy stood. There were no coincidences in such a story. Within 48 hours, he was in Dorset, where Cavell now lived in a remote cottage with a high perimeter fence and no neighbors. The air smelled of damp seaweed and rust. The man who answered the door was older, hunched, but with a mind still visibly working behind narrowed eyes. You're too late, Cavell said. Before Whimsy even introduced himself. I often am, Whimsy replied, but never as late as people think. Inside, the home was sterile. Not lived in, not exactly. Maintained, like a museum of one man's guilt. I suppose you've come to ask about Echo 9, Cavell said. He poured tea, shaking only slightly. You had the prototype removed before the board could shut it down, Whimsy said. Why? Because the Institute wasn't ready for it, Cavell replied. Because no one understood it, not Simone, not Cresswell, not even Jonas. They wanted to use silence to erase trauma, but they didn't ask what happened to the parts they erased. Whimsy tilted his head. And what did happen? Cavell looked directly at him, the cup resting mid-air. The mind doesn't destroy what it forgets. It hides it. Echo-9 was a mirror. It took everything a person refused to face and gave it shape. Whimsy set his cup down gently. You're saying the prototype didn't silence people, it externalized their silence. I'm saying, Cavell whispered, that when Greta Lang entered that room, she didn't just lose her thoughts. She gave birth to them, and something walked out. Whimsy didn't speak for a long moment. You're not mad, he said finally. Which is somehow worse. Cavell offered a wan smile. That's why I left. Because if I stayed, I'd have to destroy what we made. And I wasn't brave enough to kill my own creation. Is it still out there? Not it, Cavell said. He walked to a back room, opening the door slowly. Inside was a monitoring station, live feeds, digital logs, movement trackers, not of people, of patterns, energy, sound disruption, signatures. Whatever had been born from the quiet room had no form, but it moved. It left gaps where there should be continuity. There have been sightings, Cavell said. People who vanish into silence, rooms that go dead, moments erased from memory. The quiet room didn't end. It escaped. Whimsy studied the monitors. So Daniel Cresswell wasn't the villain, nor was Ordway. They were just trying to contain what they'd accidentally summoned. Cavell nodded. And I failed. Outside, a gull shrieked, startling, almost aggressive in its raw noise. Whimsy stood, pulling on his coat. I suppose I can't wrest a shadow, he said, but I can close the doors behind it. Cavell's expression turned grave. Just don't walk into one without leaving a trail. As Whimsy stepped into the twilight, he felt it again, that subtle emptiness in the air, like a breath waiting to be exhaled. Justice, perhaps, had been served in name, but the deeper crime, the real breach, had not yet been punished, and maybe never would. But that, he thought, was the business of silence, and silence, like truth, never stayed buried for long. The sea mist had begun to creep over the cliffs as Lord Peter Whimsy descended the path. From Cavell's cottage, the sharp scent of salt and cold iron in the air. He walked slowly, his hands in his coat pockets. His thoughts knotted with a strange unease. Justice, if such a word could be used, had been delivered in fragments, stitched together by human guilt and shadowy truths. But the story refused to end cleanly. Something in it curled back upon itself, like an unfinished sentence. He had expected Cavell's revelation to seal it, the prototype's existence, the idea that trauma could manifest. But instead, it had opened a door to something larger, something not quite nameable, echoes that walked, thoughts with shape. He could not unhear Cavell's words. They didn't ask what happened to the parts they erased. The next morning, back in London, Whimsy met with Bunter over breakfast, his silence drawing subtle glances from the ever-loyal valet. The newspaper lay folded beside his untouched tea, the headline still ringing, Institute scandal ends with resignation's closure promised. Beneath it, an article on Simone Lang's memorial. A quote from Clara Hensley read aloud by the officiant. She believed silence was not the absence of thought, but the space where truths rearranged themselves. Bunter cleared his throat gently. Will that be all, my lord? Whimsy looked up. Do we still have the spare keys to the old Cambridge flat? The one Lady Mary occupied during her lectureship. That's the one. I believe so. Shall I fetch them? No need. Just curious. But curiosity was never idle with Whimsy. That afternoon he went not to Cambridge, but to Southwark, to the secure evidence vault housing the quiet room remnants. He'd arranged a private inspection, claiming the police had overlooked something. He brought gloves, a lamp, and a hunch inside. The evidence chamber, the central component of the quiet room, stood like a sarcophagus, gold metal. Dials sealed, lights long dead. Yet something about its surface gave him pause. He ran a gloved hand along the side, where a thin plate covered the outer conduit. It wasn't a standard fitting, it had been retrofitted. The serial code etched faintly into the metal read, CRVO 03, Cresswell. No. Cavell Revision 003, not destroyed, not hidden, reassembled. The prototype Cavell claimed to have removed was never removed at all. WIMSEY lean closer. A faint humming, so faint it may have been imagined, ticked just at the edge of hearing, as though the machine were remembering itself. He closed the panel, locked it, and stepped back. He called no one, told no one. That evening, he walked alone through the city, past the Thames, past shuttered shops, into the deepening hush of London's back alleys. He needed space to think, and silence to do it in. But silence was a stranger to him now. Every quiet moment, filled with echoes. Back at his flat, a letter awaited him on his desk. No postmark, no seal. Just his name, written in a precise, looping hand he did not recognize. Inside, a single card. You asked what happened to the parts they erased. They remember you, nothing else. He stared at it for a long time, then placed it carefully in a drawer beneath a false bottom and poured himself a drink. Outside, the rain began softly, gentle, persistent, like a whisper against the glass. The phone rang once, then stopped. He stood still. The machine in the vault had not been decommissioned. The parts were not silent. And Cavell had never explained what really became of Echonine's logs, the full logs. Simone's thoughts had not ended with death. Something still moved in the dark, tracing the threads of a pattern he hadn't fully mapped. Perhaps this was the end of one case, but not the end of the mystery. There would be others, and maybe next time, the silence wouldn't just watch. It would speak.